Good evening and welcome everyone to our next lecture of Cook the Science. It's amazing to see so many of you here. I am Thomas Michaels. I'm a professor of soft and living matter physics here at ETH Zürich, and I run the Cook the Science lecture series. And we are inspired a little bit by the Harvard Science and Cooking show. And every evening we have a particular topic from soft matter physics, which we try to understand with the help of cooking and with the help of chefs that show their dishes, show their recipes, and help us to understand a little bit better the science behind that. And the topic tonight is gelation, which I personally find it's a really interesting topic. It may sound a bit boring because people think of gelation typically as jello or so, but actually you will see it's really an amazing phenomenon of soft matter physics, and it's used a lot in cuisine, in particular in modern cuisine. And to help us understand a little bit more about gelation, tonight we have an amazing guest, Markus Stöckle. So he's one of probably the most innovative chefs in Switzerland. He works at a Rosi restaurant here in Zurich. Maybe some of you have been to his restaurant. So thank you very much for being here, Markus.
Thank you very much.
And we also have a treat tonight. We have Horst Adelmann, who will tell us a little bit about starch locking and unlocking starch. And Horst is a lecturer in the Department of Health Sciences and Technology. And the reason why he's here tonight is because he actually runs some projects for students here at ETH Zurich together with Markus. So there is really an interesting connection where really the idea is to bring science directly into the kitchen of some restaurants and really see how science can help in the cooking and vice versa. So thank you for being here tonight. And yes. So tonight we'll try a little bit of a different format. So we won't start with the usual science part. So we try to embed it a little bit more. And so we'll actually go straight away into some gels. So Markus, the floor is yours.
Yes. So the thing is on, right? Yes, we start today with, we try to put it in 2 chapters, the whole word of gelation. It's a super wide range of things we talk about there, which we're going to go into much further in a minute. But chapter 1 is basically different gelling agents and gelations from maybe a more classical standpoint. And chapter 2 is more like starch gels, where Horst and I kind of met on a common ground, where he showed me some things which we would love to present today as well. And there we come here from the restaurant side of it. I'm very humbled and honored to be part of this whole thing today. And I will basically show you a little bit from where we come from. Like at Rosi, a small Wirtshaus, like a very traditional take on traditional restaurants, but in a maybe modern way, where we kind of play all the basics of cooking on science in a way, or as much as we cooks understand, but also maybe trying to look into the past in order to discover the future a bit, or maybe a bit nonsensicalness, etc. And gelatin or gelling things has been a very historical things when you look back into like 1200s, where we kind of where the first recipes of gelatin date back from. They come from fish bladders. And then you go a little bit further, 1400s, where all of a sudden every cookbook was laced with like gelatins, but all on bone broths. Or, like nobody's been talking about fish bladders anymore. And from fish bladders, and I feel like every 100 years there's a new jelly revolution. It comes in a new spotlight. We've been taking inspiration today from Marie-Antoinine Carême, who's been looking from an architectural standpoint and used gelatins in order to wow his guests and customers and kings and queens. Also, the one on the right left, this is a carp lip jelly for the old Sultan from the Ottoman Empire, the last Sultan. And yeah, the last big revolution for me in my eyes is a little bit in the 60s, where the housewives kind of brought the haute cuisine into the plates and households of the families, where all of a sudden this thing, fish bladder, is like the instant jelly where everything started, is all of a sudden the jelly we only know about. And in modern times, where we at now, after this whole industrial revolution, women off the stove, equal rights, etc., which for me it all plays very hand in hand, those sort of breakthroughs and where we stand as a society and culture today. And now those 4 topics we'll be talking about in the first chapter, and we break it up into 2 things. One is the gelatin, bone broth, skin, etc., where we extract that stuff from traditionally. Fruit, peel, pectin, something which you all know from these little petit fours maybe, or little gelatin fruit gums. Then over to algine, agar-agar, for example, and LT100, like a gelan-based, more complex way of using agar-agar, let's say. In the restaurant, we use it exactly like that. Let's say gelatin is, like those gelling agents, they're all over. And we use them to make certain traditional things either better, or we just use the very traditional things to keep it as they are. Like gelatin jus is also a gelatin sauce where, for example, a currywurst, which we fill with a liquid center. So we don't have the sauce in the sausage in the sauce, but the sauce in the sausage. So we can have a little fun playing around with the guests. And there we use gelatin, for example, or even a mixture of gelatin and agar-agar. Schnitzel, a schnitzel which is also liquid center, because we had the idea of making lobster schnitzels. But yeah, so there, yeah, of course, liquid center. A sulz, very classical as we serve it today in a restaurant. For me, there's nothing over gelatin from the melting point of view. Pectin we use for our petit four or in dessert world a lot, but also for fish courses. You will try later something which we use, which is usually traditional use as a dessert, but you can also use it in a savory way. Fluid gel is the way we use agar-agar. We don't use agar-agar, generally speaking, to set stuff, but to make a better puree, let's say. You will have a little taste of that as well. And then also the LT100, what's a traditional restaurant, and having a gelatin, a sulz, something super traditional, but maybe bringing it into the future because we can serve it also in a vegan sense and not exclude anyone. Yes. Now we start with the agar-agar and LT100. For this we have a tiny little installation. Yes, Horst, maybe a little... So here we just to showcase it a bit, also what it means for us to serve gelatins in the future. I always hated glue wine, but I thought gluing wine would be amazing. So we took a lot of inspiration from nature science. And there's a thing in algine where you can make it glow under UV light, and from space you can measure basically the ocean streams, which way they go. The last little hint on breaking through was Olafur Eliasson, where we kind of apply this in a very wobbly science kind of thing. This is the vegan jelly, basically. And this has got these like stable properties. And then also the very classical one, many people talk about is the agar-agar, but in comparison, the same amount as you would use it is just so differently. And this is just so much more fun to look at, and in the mouth, also so much more fun to eat. Yes, so I think from there, I'm going to hand over a little bit to see what these funny things, how they're built and based.
Yes, exactly. To hear a little bit how a physicist thinks about that, which maybe is not the same way as actually a chef thinks about it. So I think we can turn on the light back.
Thank you.
So how are we thinking about it? So first of all, I would like just to point out very briefly that actually, as I said before, gelatin and gelation in general is not something that is just limited to Jello, but you actually find it in a lot of foods. You can find it, for example, in bread. We saw last time that the bread crumb actually comes also from gelation of starch. You can find it in yogurt, you can find it in tofu, you can find it in cheese, you can find it when you cut through a tomato and you see that amazing gel that is in there, that it's a natural gel. So it's really amazing. And of course, and that's the reason why we are here tonight, gelation has been used a lot by chefs, particularly in modern cuisine, to really transform the texture of foods and creating amazing experiences. So what is gelation? So gelation is, from a physical point of view, a phase transition. And I would say it's a really amazing phase transition if you think about it, because what we are doing in gelation is we are literally transforming a liquid into a solid. And the way we are doing this is by adding a very small quantity of a polymer to our liquid. And with very small quantity, I mean a really small quantity. Typically less than 1% is sufficient to turn a liquid into a solid. So Markus, maybe can you tell us a little bit how much did you use to make these gelatins here?
So this LT100 is versus the agar-agar. It's got it's totally different. This basically is for elasticity, and it won't work without a tiny amount of Gelan F, which is basically a better agar-agar. The Gelan F is basically agar-agar, just less heavy, strong, and brittle. And this way we can basically add 0.04% of the agar-agar replacement and only 1% of LT100. And the LT100, those are things which we use in a restaurant, which I have a hard time to get my hands on because they come straight from the industry. And that's basically a thing, like a powder that kind of gets extracted when salad starts rotting. And when you have, I don't know if that ever happened to you, if you have in the back of your fridge maybe a leek or a salad and it starts like sliming away once you pull it off. It's that's basically what holds this together.
Amazing, Markus. So you see, it's really very little. This is practically only water, if you think about it. Yet it's solid. So this is, I think, it's an amazing phenomenon. And so the way we do this is in general by adding all of these ingredients which are actually polymers in nature. And so a polymer, what is it? It's a long chain of smaller molecules which are called monomers, which are linked together through chemical bonds. And actually here at ETH, we have a particular privilege because maybe fun, interesting fact, maybe not many of you know, but actually the field of polymer chemistry was started here at ETH Zürich with Hermann Staudinger, who was a professor here at ETH Zürich, and he was the first one to actually demonstrate that polymers are indeed long molecules that consist of many monomers bonded together through chemical bonds. And this is actually a very interesting story because at the time, in the 1920s, the view was that large macromolecules like polymers couldn't exist. So it's really an amazing story that granted him the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1953. So really we have a privilege to be here tonight and talking about polymers and what polymers can do many years after they've been discovered in this sense. So polymers are these long molecules, and many of the gelling agents that we use tend to be polysaccharides, which means many sugars. So they are actually long chains of many sugars linked together, or proteins. And here I'm showing you the example of agar-agar, which you have actually seen here. So it has really this kind of structure. This is two sugars linked together, and that forms effectively the monomer, which is then repeated in a chain here. Now, many chefs like to use a term that is very fancy, which is hydrocolloids. You probably have heard about it if you are a little bit into modern cuisine. But I would argue that actually it's not really a very useful term, because from a soft matter perspective, a hydrocolloid is simply a suspension of tiny particles in water. And these particles have to be small. They have to be very tiny, because otherwise, the suspension becomes unstable. So there is a maximum size for these hydrocolloids, or these tiny particles. There is an equation, very good. So this is the first equation of the evening. So it tells us that there is a maximum size for these hydrocolloids. Otherwise, if they are too big, they tend to sediment and the suspension becomes unstable. And so this is, in some sense, applies to many things. Any kind of small particles that are suspended in water would be called hydrocolloid. Even when you make a soup, you puree broccoli, then the broccoli floating in your soup, they would be called hydrocolloids. So in that sense, it's not really a very useful term because it actually means anything. But actually, chefs like to use this term to refer really to these more modern gelling agents, for example, agar-agar or Gellan that you have seen here. And so we will try to use the term here in this sense tonight. But remember that actually the concept of hydrocolloids is a little bit more broad. So how is it that polymers can gel? So what is the basic physics behind this? So as we have said, the polymers are these long molecules, and these long molecules, when they are in solution, they like to easily stick to each other. And this is similar to what happens when you have a bowl of spaghetti. The spaghetti get tangled with each other. And so under the appropriate conditions, what happens is that these polymers can form bonds and then form a network structure that traps the water and spans the whole system. And this is what we call a gel. So you can start off with your polymer molecule, which is actually a really long molecule, so it's really part of a long string. And then this string gets tangled with many other polymers in the solution. And then what we want to do is we want to create bonds between these polymer chains, which is what we call cross-links. These are physical bonds in the sense that they tend to be weak interactions that are sufficient to keep these chains together. And then what comes out of this is a network structure that traps the water inside. And this is effectively a gel. So we get this definition of a gel, which is a polymer network structure that holds water in it. And it's typically formed by using very small quantities of a polymer. So as I said, less than 1% sometimes is enough to transform something into a gel. And so if you think about it, it means that actually this object here is 99% or probably even more water. Yet it's solid, so it's crazy. So if you think about it, so it's literally just water with a little bit of polymer, and it's solid. So this, I think, it's an amazing feature of gelation. Now, physicists like to think about this gelation process or this network structure that emerges from gelation as a super, super large molecule that spans the whole system. And this is an interesting way of thinking about it because it explains one very important feature of the gelation process, which is the fact that you actually need a minimum amount of these bonds, of these cross-links to form the gel. If you don't have enough bonds, you don't form the gel. And so to understand this, we can make use of one concept, which is called percolation. It's actually a concept that mathematicians like a lot. And so for this reason, I'm going to take a mathematician view of this problem. And so I'm going to start here with a lattice. You can imagine the lattice sides here to be the polymers, which I'm now going to link together. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to randomly introduce links in the system. So I'm going to, at random, pick two sides and then connect them through a bond. And then I can introduce another link and then another link, and I keep doing this process, and I introduce randomly links. And then what you see is that as I'm starting to do this process, at some point, things start to connect. And there will come a point in this process where actually I start to connect across the entire system. You can see here from left to right, I can go through a path which is connected from the left to the right. And this is what we call percolation. And so, to put it in mathematical formulas, the way to think about it is, let me introduce P, which is the probability of having a connected path. So I'm asking, what is the probability that actually in this realization I have a connected path from the left to the right, or from the top to the bottom? This is going to be P. And then F is the fraction of links filled. So as I introduce more and more links, F increases. And then FC is the critical fraction that I need in order to first form a connected path. And what is very interesting here is that you see that actually the probability of forming this connected path, of having percolation, it's not a smooth function, but rather it is 0 until you reach a critical threshold, which is the percolation threshold, and then the probability starts to become finite. And so this is very similar to what happens with gels. You need a minimum amount of bonds, of links, in between the polymer chains in order for the system to be connected and span the entire system. And this is actually very important because if you don't have enough links, the system is not connected and it's not rigid, so you don't really have a gel. But when you start to have enough links, then the system becomes connected. And now you can imagine squishing the thing. And now because I'm connected across the whole system, the system reacts elastically. And so I've really transformed what looks like a liquid into a solid by forming enough links between the components. And so this is really, I think, fundamentally, the way we can think about this gelation transition. So you need to form these links between the polymers. What I want to actually point out is now a little bit of a few factors that are important, to take into consideration when we are doing this type of gelation. So this sol-gel transition, which is what we call in technical terms. And so the one important factor, of course, is the concentration of the polymers. So this is important because, as I said, we need enough polymer to form enough links between these molecules for the gel to form. Another important factor is hydration, so which simply means that we have to somewhat coat these polymers with water molecules. We have to solubilize them in water before they can start forming these links. And so this is an important step that we have to do. And many of these gelling agents don't dissolve well in water, which means that we have to heat them up first before we can hydrate them. The temperature of hydration depends on the gelling system. Some actually can hydrate, like xanthan gum, at room temperature, but many, like for example agar-agar, requires high temperatures for hydration. So this is why you have to heat them up. And the hydration temperature also depends on many factors like acidity, salts, and so on and so forth. So it's really actually quite a complicated process, but it's really an essential step to get these polymers to be dispersed in solution like here. Then, of course, another important element is temperature. And temperature is important because this type of transition for many systems, like, for example, agar-agar, also happens with lowering temperature. So we go at high temperature from having polymers dispersed in solution. By lowering temperature, we allow the polymers to tangle and form these links and this network. And this is going to be our next equation of the evening. How can we understand this? Well, a basic principle of physics is that we want to lower the free energy of the system F, and the way we can do this is by effectively creating these bonds, creating these links between the polymers. We lower the free energy, and this is accounted for in this internal energy term here, which represents the bonds. But of course, there is also another player here, which is S, which is the entropy. And when we put these bonds here, we lose entropy. And entropy, you think about it as kind of disorder, but actually it's really more the possible configurations that the polymer can have. And so when it is bonded with other polymers, that restricts the possible configurations that the polymer can take. And so that actually comes with an entropic penalty. And so temperature is the link between the two. And you see that at low temperature, this term here is not very important. So the U dominates, which means that the bond dominates. And so the thing is actually a gel. But at higher temperature, this term here starts to dominate. And therefore, we start to have a breaking of the bonds and the gel melts. So this is really fundamentally the way in which you can understand this from a physics perspective. Now, there are other factors to consider. Some gels require coagulants to form or help them form. So coagulants are things that you can add to the system to help them gelate. And so this includes acid, for example. It includes some types of salts, enzymes, and things like that. And so one example of this is actually seen with pectin that requires calcium ions in order to coagulate. And so here what you see is that the calcium ions, which actually have two charges, like this kind of charge particles here, they connect they bridge the two strands here, which are negatively charged, and this gives rise to this structure, which we call egg box structure, where the chains are linked through these ions over here. Another important factor to consider are solution conditions. Solution conditions are important, and this means acidity, so pH, whether you have an acid or not, salts, alcohol. These are all factors that actually play a big role. And sometimes they can actually impair the ability of the gel to form or be stable. And fundamentally, this is really because the solution conditions alter what are the interactions that determine these cross links between the chains. And maybe one point that I want to point out here with this equation is that maybe you don't think about it, but pH, which is the acidity, is actually related with the charges. So it actually has really an important effect, for example, in regulating, how much charges you have in the system. So it really plays a big role. And this is important to consider in your preparation when you choose the gelling agent. Now, we have seen here two types of gelation. So we have agar-agar and Gellan, LT100. So let's look a little bit more in detail about how these specific gelling agents work. And so what I've told you before is rather general. So you want to form these cross links, you want to form these bonds, but how that works specifically in each system is a little bit different. And so in agar-agar, as we said, it's extracted from various species of red algae, and it forms a gel to the formation of hydrogen bonds, which gives rise to this double helical structure here that allows chains to be connected to each other, and therefore you get this kind of network structure, which is actually quite a tight network structure. One thing which is interesting with agar is that actually it melts at a very different temperature than it forms a gel. So the agar-agar melts at 85 degrees, which actually makes it ideal for hot preparation, so you can actually serve it hot. But it gels at 35 degrees. So you see you have a huge difference between the gelation and the melting temperatures, which is what we call hysteresis. So, which is this difference between the formation and the melting of the agar. Now, some gels have this possibility. Not all of them show hysteresis, so this is really an aspect that actually can allow you to play a little bit with the system. Agar is a thermoreversible gel, which means that we can actually play with temperature to form it, dissolve it, form it again, so it's actually reversible. And it's important to note that not all gels are actually thermoreversible. Some are irreversible, for example, when you cook an egg, which we have seen at the very beginning. There, once the gel in the egg is set, you cannot turn back and dissolve it again, just by changing temperature. Then the next example that we have here is LT100 or Gellan. So Gellan is a product from fermentation of bacteria. And here the mechanism is a little bit different, and it actually requires some coagulant, in particular gel-promoting cations, so these charges, as I said here. And so the mechanism of formation of the gel here is, again, it relies on the formation of these double helical structures, and then these double helical structures can be linked together to these gel-promoting cations, these charges, and this results in this structure here, where you actually have a lot of the polymer, which is actually in a random conformation, and so that gives actually a relatively weaker type of structure. So Gellan gives rise to a little bit of a weaker type of gel.
Better mouthfeel in that case.
Yes, exactly. And now I'm going to actually summarize a little bit some of these properties. So as I said, there are really many factors that control the gelation of these products, and I've tried to summarize them here in terms of the temperature at which you reach hydration. So you have, for example, when you make agar-agar, you have to disperse it in cold water, then heat it up in order to hydrate it and then cool it down for it to gel, and it melts at a relatively high temperature. And then here you see the stable pH range. Agar-agar can actually tolerate quite a wide range of pH, so that's actually good, for example, if you're making an acidic type of gel. It tolerates salts, it tolerates alcohol, so it's actually quite a versatile gel. So Gellan actually results in a more elastic type of gel. Temperatures are a little bit different. The tolerance are a little bit different. So you see every gelling agent brings something different to the table. And so maybe I leave the floor maybe more to you, Markus, to tell a little bit how you think about this when you are actually planning a dish, or you're planning to select a particular gelling agent.
Yes, so the freedom of using those type of gelling agents, what perspective are you coming from? What's the guest perspective? What should it be? If you want to do a puree, how can we make a better puree? If you want to do a gel, how can you make a maximum wobbly gel, etc. But it's all like, it all won't work if there is too much acidity in there. And if you use this one in order to try to eat for something to be like very melty in your mouth, which resembles this much more, it's never going to be as close to, this is going to be the closest to gelatin you can get, but nothing's going to come close to gelatin in that sense, where it just melts in your mouth, very velvety and almost samtic. And so this one is very much harder to work, but you can use those two instead of gelatin in a warmer sense. So you have this one instead of using your timbal, which you used to set with egg, or like a chawamushi, the egg set kind of little jelly, where you can extend it and make it warmer, have it more melty in your mouth, closer to gelatin. So in a warm sense, you will not get any better than this. But this one, we don't use it in a restaurant in order to set jellies and to serve jellies like that. This one, where I'm probably going to move over to the next thing, you're all going to get a little cup with like a onion soubise in it. Onion soubise is like a very old way of making a white onion puree in a classical sense, but where we make basically more like a tea from the onion, where we literally, when the onion hits the pan, very finely sliced, so the water can run out immediately, and just the point where it gets like really sweet onion water releases with the butter. Then we add stock and a bit of milk or cream in order to create like an onion flavored, very elegant milk, which we turn into a gel like this. And now you can see here the gel, how brittle and hard it is. And then we turn this one into a fluid gel, something you could not do with gelatin, because gelatin, when you blend it, you could never make purees from it. You can foam it up and froth it up with a whisk, but you would never be able to make a puree. And that's where the agar-agar comes in the restaurant, and very handy, where we have a very precise and very clean product in the end, where we turn the onion soubise from a liquid state where we make the milk, and then we turn it into a block. And after the block, we turn it, we put it in the mixer. And then we just blend it until it's like really smooth, up to 4 minutes. I'm just going to start it off so you see what the different stages are. But you have that right in front of you now, where you can easily spoon it out, and it's like an onion dill soubise, which is almost like a much more softer and velvety puree, as you will get it just from blending onions. And you can play a lot with like flavors and stuff as well. So you don't need to use onion in order to, so you could also make a tea puree or something like this. And if you, like this would have never been possible back in the day, making a gel from gelatin. But now with things like agar-agar, you can see here a little bit which direction. What the stage is now. This is now broken off, and if you continue blitzing it, it's going to get smoother and smoother and smoother, and then it ends up to be this cream you have in your little cup there. And yeah, so you don't use everything for everything. It's literally very particular where you would use LT100 or the Gellan type of gels, the very stable gels with the where you can go higher in acidity and alcohol, etc. And then the queen of them all, which is still, I guess, gelatin, where we go to now, I believe.
Well, actually, I think I wanted to say very briefly something a little bit about these fluid gels, which is exactly what you are trying now. This is an interesting phenomenon, also again from the physics perspective, because it allows me to introduce another equation of the evening.
The equations.
So enjoy the equation while eating. So this is actually, fluid gels are examples of what we call non-Newtonian fluids. So a fluid gel is very interesting because it's a particular type of material that is a gel, a solid gel when it is at rest, but then when you stir it, you apply a shear force, it starts to move, to flow. And so it becomes more liquid. So when you put it in your mouth and you start to bite into it, it turns liquid and it gives a completely different experience to how you have it on your plate. And so this is an example of what is called the non-Newtonian fluids. We have seen last time a little bit the idea of Newtonian fluids, which are the fluids that are characterized by a constant viscosity. The viscosity tells us how easily the fluid flows. So for example, honey doesn't flow very easily because it has a high viscosity, but the idea is that if you apply a certain force, the liquid will flow, and if you apply a double the force, the liquid will flow twice. And so this is what happens with a Newtonian fluid. And so now when you have many examples in soft matter actually don't behave like this, and we have systems which are so-called shear thickening, which means that the viscosity of the system increases the more strain rate you apply, so which is effectively the more you stir. So imagine you stir in your coffee or so. So the more you stir, the more viscous they become. And so an example of this we have seen is actually bread dough, which seems to become more and more harder the more you stir. And there is also the opposite type of behavior, which we call shear thinning, which are fluids that are actually becoming less viscous the more you stir. And examples of this is, for example, yogurt, which looks more solid. It's actually kind of stays there, particularly Greek yogurt, but when you start to stir it, it becomes more liquid. You probably have noticed this at home. And so this is actually really a physical phenomenon that you are actually, by stirring, by applying the force, you make this substance more liquid. And so a fluid gel is something like that. So it's something that you obtain typically by taking a set gel, and then you put it in a blender, and so you break up, you get this smaller pieces of gel, which at rest stuck to each other a little bit, and so you get a kind of firmer consistency, and this is important to serve. So you serve something which is solid-like, but then as soon as you apply a force to it, for example, by adding it into your mouth, it turns more liquid. And this is because these particles that you form there actually have time to rearrange, they flow over each other, and the substance turns more liquid-like. And so this, I think, is really an amazing feature. Of course, ketchup is another example of that, and good luck playing with that tonight. So, now, the next topic, as we said, gelatin and pectin. So
Yes, gelatin and pectin. The little picture here on the left is the pectin. It's a little lederhosen, a little giveaway we serve in the end, and it's made from sea buckthorn, from this elderly couple who goes through the mountains in Graubünden. And so it's basically just the product which they sell as a juice, and we cook it in a little bit, set it like this, and the magic is done with that product. Just this cooking out a little bit, and then you pour it out. It's gonna set overnight, and it's got this like beautiful viscosity. The same with the gelatin. Gelatin is just amazing because you can set very delicate liquids in a way where the mouthfeel is just unmatched. And we will have two little examples in front of you for you to kind of compare those two. One is in a cup, which is like a clear liquid. There's also a recipe attached to it of a tomato water set as a tomato jelly. And this clear thing, I hope it's still wobbly and not liquid yet from the room temperature. And when you eat this one and put it in the mouth, and you just feel like how samtig and very zart schmelzend it flows off your tongue, like how elegant and almost like the little, like a silk material on the tongue. And that's the beauty of using that thing and having a very strong flavor release without any overpowering of a gelling agent. And that's why, you know, you use gelatin. That's why people like chefs or female chefs love using this so much. Versus the pâtisserie. And the pâtisserie is also like the main difference between setting those two. The one cannot take too much acidity, which is the one you just tried, the tomato jelly. I think the acidity from the tomato is almost like is probably the maximum you can go into. And then you have the pectin on the other hand, which is completely vice versa. You need the acidity in order for it to set. And I am only a fan of pectin things when they have like this, almost like when you blanch a lemon and you blitz the whole lemon, and this texture, which is like dense, also velvety, but much, much thicker. And it's got this whole, when you eat the little jelly, which is in front of you, it's like it's a bergamot jelly. We use bergamot juice and cook it down with pectin and sugar, basically, and set it with with the acidity in the end. You pour it out, and then it gets this like very creamy, dense mouthfeel. The other one is really light and fresh, and the other one is like rather dense, and it's got this like beautiful chew to it. And the Japanese are, you know, also with like flavors and all these things so much that they knew all these things in culture already so much, because we only have two words to describe a gummy texture, and they're usually negative, like in a sense. But generally, there's like 200 words out there in order to describe something gummy and chewy, but in a very positive way. And the pectin, I think, resembles this really well, how dense and still textured the whole jelly comes in the end. And that's not only sweet, using this also for fish or so. It's very nice.
Yes, and you see here again, I've summarized a little bit some of the parameters. So you see, for example, the pH range here is very different between the two, right? Also, the temperatures are actually very different. And one thing is actually really interesting is the melting temperature of gelatin, which is actually very close to the body temperature. And that really plays for this really melt-in-mouth feel. And it's actually interesting because you can derive a gelatin also from fish. And an interesting fact that I actually didn't know, but the melting temperature of gelatins is actually very close to the body temperature of the animals from which they were taken. And so fish is actually much colder, and so that's actually why the fish gelatin actually turns out to have a much lower melting point
So
than...
we should only use fish gelatin for the flavor release to be the best.
There you go, exactly.
All right, good, amazing. This was halal, by the way, if anyone wonders.
Yes, so I think, do you want to show anything more for pectin gelatin?
I think pectin gelatin is yeah, I think we went deep enough.
Yes, very good. And so I think we are ready to go into our second chapter with the starch.
Yes. Yes, we go. Yeah, I think we're going to move over to starch.
Yes.
And which fascinated me when we talked about it, because gelatin, gelling agents, etc. And you were only talking about pasta, doughs, polenta. And we're like, all right, yeah, but yeah, true, makes sense. It's gelling agents. So we thought today we do something on a basis where we met, something he showed me first, and some technique we used to apply then at the restaurant. And yeah.
Yes, so starch is actually, maybe you don't think about it, but it's actually a gelling agent. And it's actually really a classic one for our Western cuisine. And so very briefly, I'm going to introduce a little facts about starch, which are useful to think about it. And before I hand over to Horst, that he will actually explain more about this. But so starch, it actually comes in cells as part of starch granules. Here you see potato starch granules, which are actually relatively big compared to other types of starches. For example, corn starch granules are actually much smaller. And this is why potato starch typically feels a little bit more, it has this sandy texture. So because we actually, with our mouth, we can detect particles that are of size above about 10 micrometers. So actually, we are able to detect these granules over here, which we don't for other types of starch. And now these starch granules contain two types of starch molecules, which are amylose and amylopectin. So we have seen them last time also when making bread. So amylose is, both are kind of chains of glucose molecules. The amylose is a linear chain of these molecules, whereas the amylopectin is a branched polymer, and amylose generally is better at gelling. Now, inside the starch granules, the amylose and amylopectin, they come in a particular crystalline structure, which is actually really complex and really beautiful. But now, when you actually cook starch, so when you heat it up, what happens is that these starch granules start to swell, they become bigger and bigger, and then also they break and they release this amylose, and then that actually allows the system to gel. And so, for example, you mentioned, Markus, the example of polenta. I am Ticinese, so I love polenta, of course. And so there is really an example where you have, these granules that then swell and stick to each other, and then they form this huge network that occupies the whole system and holds in water, which is, as we've seen before, a gel. Okay? And so this is really basically what you should know about starch. And now I hand over to Horst, who will actually tell something more about locking and unlocking starch.
And yes, locking and unlocking starch is very important for potatoes. And I will show you here our types, what we have in Switzerland. And this is very important because if you made some potato mash, for example, with this a green potato, then be sure you will have like a slimy potato mash. It's not so nice, but you see, I do it today again, and I was real surprised. Our green potatoes changed to blue. But it's important that you say, okay, you would like to have the right potatoes. For potato flakes, you have to buy these blue potatoes. And the reason why is, you see here, the potato starch are real in cellular form. Means you see the image. Let me see, is here? Oh yes, yeah, here. You see this image, and this is real micro film from potato starch. It's a slide, real raw. And the reason is for us when we will produce a good potato flakes means in the end we must be sure that we do not damage these cells here. Means you see here inside the cell we have the starch granulate outside the water. And the worst case is real that if we go in here, means always we have to prepare them, we have to take the skin away, we have to cut them, and during that you damage the cells, and the cells comes out the starch, and the starch is the problem. It's swelling if you made after the potato flakes, means the potato mash, and if you could not separate them, then you have real like not this texture what you like to have. Means what we do is always we wash the potatoes during sliding, and then we made like a preheating step to stabilize the cells, the cell walls here. Oops, some problems here. You see it looks like that, and this make our potato more the cells more stabilize the cells more for the drying process afterwards. Means this is the reason for, because if we made mash afterwards, our instant mash, we need a lot of this not damaged cells, and yeah, that we have real nice potato mash. I guess we could show that.
Yes.
Means we have here like a normal package. We put it in and mix them and not overcook them, because the reason is now we have here. Oopala.
First we go with the cold, right?
Yes, cold, and let them in, and then afterwards you come with the hot water. You have it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, and the potato is the only. Yeah, if you see the flour, I mean the wet granulates, you have the starch, not like that what we have here in the potatoes. Means there's not in cells, it's real open. It's the same in corn. You have it open, and yes, and the thing is, if the starch is not real gelatinized, our body could not take them. That's it. Means it's always, I discussed it with students when we make pasta, and they always really important that you have the al dente point, the right al dente point, and say, okay, if you go in north from Europe, you will have always 100% get the energy because you have no al dente. If you go in south of Italy, and be sure 30% of the starch going in and comes here out, because you have no chance to get them with your body, because you have not the right enzymes. Yes, of course, if I take a spaghetti in my mouth, one fork of them, and bite them and move them in my mouth more than half an hour, yes, be sure, then you could have all the energy of that. But the normal way, not.
Yeah,
so,
from a gastronomic standpoint, this is pure madness, what you showed me there.
Hopefully. Yes, super. Ah, now you have to wait. Yeah, okay. No. It's amazing, huh?
No, it's...
No, come on. No. Look. It's like, have a look here. If you see the other one, this is the right potato. I hope so for the company. But the reason is always if we have too much unlocked starch in it. Okay, we have here better color because the potato type here is neither as you got this from the industry. There's always the students tell me also when they made the fresh potato flakes and say, oh, amazing of taste, but that's it.
I think it's
nice
genius
now.
Because
good,
from a chef's standpoint of view, if you touch a potato puree with a whisk, you probably won't do it for long. It's because it starts like gluing up instantly. Like the more you move it, and the more the potato starch can break loose. But through this curing process, almost like that's how I believe, like that's how I kind of see it a bit, where you lock the starches in a place where they can't break out anymore, and I can make a potato base and always whip it up fresh with a whisk in there. Is every time when I have a new chef coming in, they'll be like, what are you guys doing? What am I doing here? Why did I come here? They can't even do mash. But it's this thing where you have like a creamier and more fluffy texture through this process of bringing it up to like the 70 degrees, then dropping it down, and then the starch locks up. Then you cook it. So you have done the potato, prepared the potato in a way where it's ready to cook, and you can have a very stable product which you almost can't destroy anymore.
Yeah, this is, but you fix the cell wall. That's only the part where you
just the cell wall.
Only that, have nothing to do with the starch self, because the starch self, there's real gelatinized over 80 complete. That's that what you would like to have.
Yeah.
And then hopefully it's always in the cell self, and then afterwards you would like to have during the drying process, it would crystallize. That's the point. And then you go back, put water in, and it comes back to the rubbery stage. And the problem is here for the industry, they would produce for the normal consumer. But the reason is if the potato getting older, it lost some stabilized walls and so on, and then you have to go back, say, okay, we need some lecithin or what else, like stabilizers, to get always the same, would say mash. Who cares?
Yes, I think it's very interesting because actually when we discuss what to talk about, I mean, starch is really amazing. And the point is, I'm going to say it, I like instant mash, personally. I don't know about you. And I think, Markus, you also told me you like it.
This is really the reason. If you put a lot of butter in or a flavor, what makes the mash better. Means if you take it only what is written on the package, then it's okay, no. First time, yes, because then you know how must be the texture must be, but then you change with other ingredients. And this makes real better, of course.
Yeah.
Then you could produce other products, not only mash, because then you got really your ideas. Come on.
But what is interesting is that I always wondered, why is it that it's so good, at least, I mean, the way I like it. And then, you know, you try to do it at home. You cook the potatoes, you spend lots of time doing it, and then it doesn't come out the same. And so now I understood how it works. So you have to lock the starch in. And so this procedure is it's interesting. So try it out when you're at home. So cook the potatoes
70 degrees, hold it there for 10 minutes, or how long do we do? 10 minutes, and then you drop it to 18.
It's not needed. First is choose the right potatoes.
All right.
That's it.
If you boil them. Then don't boil them, cool them down to 18 degrees, and then you can cook them like normal, and the potato mash should come out more like the instant mash. So I'm going to try it.
No.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not really agree, but yes, own experience too.
Yeah, nice. So what basically is also a difference there with this one is like super fluffy and light. Of course, there's just water and potato now. Yes. But what we kind of skipped is this part, the starch itself. And the starch alone is amazing too. Like, you know, here is the worst enemy, but it's so strong, you could blast the walls with it.
Makes more creative, you know? Okay, doesn't
So,
work.
and
Yeah.
this is
That's
also
it.
just to showcase a bit the power and the intensity of our foods, the stuff that we eat every day and we take for granted, and how complex the whole jazz is actually, and what it frees you up to do also. Because I've got a dough. I'm thinking a lot about potato dumplings at the moment. And from a Bavarian hindsight, it kind of makes sense to think about these sort of things. And also, again, about why we always have negative words for like a bouncy texture in a potato dumpling, and why back home this would be the worst, having like a bouncy dumpling. But when you go to Japan and you eat a mochi and the pull and this amazing texture that challenge you almost a little bit, or makes you think a bit more freely, is also can be a very pleasant thing in other things. And there's one thing next to the potato mochi that we work on at the moment. I've got a little dough prepared where we basically used the potato base the worst way possible. Like it's almost like a potato dumpling recipe where we just cut out the egg. So it's literally starch and potato. And we have a bit of water in there. And with this dough, we are basically able to... I'm going to open this up quickly. We're basically able to make a very stretchy dough, and you can tell already. I've been working this out just for like 10 minutes, and the potato dough is so sticky and gloopy that you can see here. This would be the worst in your mash, but in a potato noodle, let's say a Chinese way of looking at a Schupfnudel, where you really want this elasticity, and also just the feel of the whole thing is insane. How this turns into almost like literally a gel, almost like a gummy little gel, and turning this into a noodle gives you a very bouncy work, because we worked out that starch so much. Just makes a very bouncy noodle. You could push this through a sieve. We can just cook it off like this. Once the water is going, I'm going to make a couple of those little noodles.
But you use starch, or what is that?
This is now potato starch, a little bit more, so we can separate it a bit more. But literally, we've been working out the potato with a bit of starch to a point where it comes like really elastic. And this way, we will have a nice textured pasta made from potatoes.
So what ingredients, proportions did you use exactly for making this dough?
This is like 1% of starch to potato, and then just the working out. So it's got this like almost chewy, dense pull, rather than being like really hard. So it's like that's where you can play around with perfecting it a little bit. Where like, okay, when you have a Schupfnudel and you don't work it really well and you have it too thick, it's super tough to chew, but also nice. So I don't necessarily see it as a negative thing. But these ones, they're just going to hold up shape so well. They're going to be nice and firm in the mouth and be a real, almost like an al dente pasta, just by working out the starch like the opposite from the old puree. Also, little dumplings, filling them. And this one, it's just a very easy way of doing that, using the potato, a touch of starch, working it out hardcore, and then pushing it through a little ricer, or rolling it out like painstakingly like this. And then you cook it in the water, it comes up, and you just drizzle a little bit of Sichuan oil on it, a little black vinegar, and it's a fun, nice little dinner. So the thing where we plaster our walls with can be a really nice thing to cook with. So it's the complete opposite, which is kind of fascinating.
And so for how long are you cooking them?
Literally until they come up, swim a little bit, give them 10 seconds, and then we take them out. That's how quick it goes. So when you strain them out without water, then you get these nice little noodles here. It's boiling too much. It's all a bit funny, to be honest, now. But this one, if you have it like this, just a potato, and then a little bit of oil on it, and that's done. And then you kind of eat the science. Someone wants to try it?
The audience, or?
Huh?
The audience tried, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
If someone else wants to come up here, just the texture.
It's really worth it.
Fine.
It doesn't look like much. And let's say you kind of drain it in right away. You pull it out with a nice sieve or so. Just this texture of that noodle is so different to what the dumpling is like. Be careful, mind yourself, it's rather hot. Yeah, nice. So that's basically unlocked starch.
Yes, so I think it's very interesting really to see how from the same starting point you can actually create two products that are completely different, and it really has to do with this locking, unlocking of the starch, which is really very interesting. So thank you very much, Markus, for this, and Horst. So I think we've come to the end. So I hope you enjoyed tonight. So I would like to advertise the next events, which are going to be in the spring. So we will have on the one side actually a special guest, Eli Foskan, that has a particular connection with Markus. I'm not going to say more. Yes, your affair, exactly. And so we will talk about ice cream, which is going to be very interesting, and this is going to be actually close to the summer, so the 13th of May. And then on the 18th of March, we will talk with Shem Leopin from Stoll Café about coffee, which I think is a really amazing system as well. And then on the 8th of April, we will have Patrick Marxer from Das Pure with the topic of fermentation that many of you actually suggested as an interesting topic. So we will try to dive into this aspect. So these are the three events for the next semester, 18th of March, 8th of April, 13th of May. Registrations will open at a particular time point, which will be announced. So this time we will try to have a different registration system so that we can allow more people, and also different, for different events, allowing also people that couldn't come to the events these days also to join. And so everything will be announced on the website, and so please follow us. And as usual, please leave your feedback with the QR code here, or also with the printed feedback forms. And the recipes will also be released on the website, and have also a card that you have received with the particular recipe that Markus has kindly shared with us. And with this, I would like to thank you so much for joining. I hope you had fun. Thank you very much, Markus and Horst, for this.